Syria's 6 years of war and crimes with impunity. Can any peace deal include justice for the victims? Tonight, the forensics that follow the fighting. A Sherlock Holmes for Aleppo. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
Syrians have seen their country reduced to rubble.
War crimes, I'm afraid, have become the status quo in Syria.
Like we said in our demands, a fair a justice for them. We just want to know if they are alive or dead.
The message that while we are going to talk about the future of Syria, we should not forget those who are still either detained or abducted or are missing.
I just want to know that my husband is alive or dead.
The status quo must change if we are to address these grave security threats.
I think I have a belief that I will get to my rights.
Also coming up tonight, a couple of centuries ago, the first U.S. presidents wore wigs. We'll combine that presidential powder with America First follicles, and you've got one head of a hit at Germany's Carnival this year. We're going to get you fitted for a Donald Trump wig coming up later in the show. We begin the day in search of peace and a good detective for Syria. For 6 years, conflict has ruled the country. Crimes committed against women, men, and children, and those with a different political opinion, well, they've gone unchecked. Impunity sanctioned by those with power. Now, after the atrocities from chemical weapons and the horrors inside Aleppo, talks have started again, aimed at bringing an irreversible stop to the fighting in Syria. But can peace bring justice? In a moment, you'll meet one of the modern-day sleuths for Syria, using high-tech to gather evidence that could one day possibly convince a court to convict. Our coverage starts now with the peace talks in Geneva.
It's an act of solidarity. The UN Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, is meeting Syrian women, some of whom suffered under either the Assad regime or the opposition. He wants to give a voice to civil society in Syria, which isn't officially taking part in the peace talks.
They were sending to me and through me to everyone the message that while we are going to talk about the future of Syria, we should not forget those who are still either detained or abducted or are missing.
In the morning, de Mistura held separate talks with delegations from the Syrian government and the opposition, which is still split. Both military opposition as well as political opposition groups have been invited to Geneva. But as has previously been the case, the government and opposition groups are far apart on key points, like what role the regime of Bashar al-Assad will play after the fighting. The two parties, the government and the opposition, agree about this transitional phase. But should the Assad government be part of that? The majority of the opposition says no. Before talks go any further, the delegations in Geneva want to first of all set the ground rules for further negotiations.
All right, we want to pull in now Maks Czuperski. He is director of the Digital Forensics Lab at the Atlantic Council in Washington. Maks, it's good to have you on the show. You are considered, as we said in our report earlier, a modern-day Sherlock Holmes for Syria. Tell us exactly what that means and why it's important as these peace talks resume.
Thank you, first of all, Brent, for having me on the show. You make it sound more special than it is. All it really is that at a time where we are seeing crimes of the 20th century and the horrors of the 20th century be brought back into the present by Bashar al-Assad and his supporters, including the Kremlin, we are applying 21st century technologies to hold them accountable and most importantly, reveal the crimes that they are committing. And that's what being a digital Sherlock is all about. It is using technology that is accessible to all of us in the open source domain and better understanding what is actually happening on the ground.
We've got a couple of clips, Max, to better illustrate the work that you're doing, and we'd like to show. This first one, it begins with what was a hospital in Aleppo that came under attack. If you could talk us through what we are seeing here.
Sure. So I think the first clip that you're seeing is a clip that we've actually asked a independent research organization called Forensic Architecture to create for us. It's a three-dimensional model of a hospital that was bombed time and again by the Assad regime or by the Russians. And what we're able to do is that we're able to extract so-called digital breadcrumbs from the ground in Aleppo and then recreate them from a two-dimensional aspect into a three-dimensional aspect in a way that hasn't been done so far before. Why this is important is because it puts the evidence into context and allows people who aren't on the ground to better understand what had happened there.
We've got another clip we'd like to show you that plots the dates of attacks on a hospital in Aleppo. What does this image tell us, Max?
Well, the important part here is that, you know, one of the quick responses from Russia, for example, were that these bombings were accidental, that it wasn't them who did it, or that if they did it, it might have been not intentional. There's two things you have to consider, Brent. And first of all, these hospitals were built by the Assad regime, so the Assad regime knows where hospitals are on the map. It would be ignorant to claim that they don't know where hospitals are based in their most important cities. Second of all, if it was an accident, and it does happen in a war, the question is, why do we see these strikes happening time and time and again? What you end up seeing is a very deliberate pattern, which was part of the strategy of the Assad regime and its supporters to try to force the remaining civilians into submission.
So, I mean, are you saying we've got proof here that this hospital that we saw in this image it was hit repeatedly, and it wasn't a result of just a lot of bombings in the area? I mean, can we say beyond a question of doubt that the hospital was targeted? Is that what we're being shown?
I think the evidence suggests that, absolutely.
And it looks like forensic evidence from a crime scene. And do you foresee it being offered one day into a courtroom setting as just that?
We really hope that's going to be the case. Look, one of the things that we have to understand is that we are no longer in an age where a few outlets are covering what is happening. You know, you're a reporter and a journalist yourself. You know that now civilians on the ground are contributing to the coverage of events around the world. And when you have a regime such as the Assad regime commit the crimes that they have committed in the last few years, and they are quite horrific events, then we now have a much bigger amount of information documenting those crimes. And using open source and digital forensic research, we can decipher between fact and fiction through rather easy ways. So we do hope that this is going to change also the way that, of course, the courts around the world are seeing conflicts, so that they can hold accountable for those that still think they can drag us back into the horrors of the past.
Well, you know, I mean, it's interesting you bring up that point, because we do have people who say that we are now living in a post-factual era. Who or what would you say are the biggest threats to justice and to the truth in Syria at this moment?
Well, actually, you said post-fact world. That was the theme of the Munich Security Conference just this weekend, where Secretary Madeleine Albright, former U.S. Undersecretary Nick Burns, and former Foreign Minister and Prime Minister of Sweden, Carl Bildt, alongside myself and our President Fred Kemp, had raised the issue of disinformation surrounding the conflict. And so we've done a press conference there to set the record straight, and just minutes after that, both Iranian and Russian leaders on the main stage in the Bayerischer Hof at the Munich Security Conference in front of all these very distinguished guests that claimed complete innocence in the conflict. What we are facing is a time where it seems that someone on the main stage thinks they can lie about what is happening, but in fact, the evidence is mounting, and it's much harder now for actors on the global stage to lie about these crimes.
I mean, that's one side of the coin. We've been talking this week about the issue of getting people mobilized for all kinds of political causes. And last night we talked about the fact that there is almost a sense that people have been desensitized to atrocities. People are willing to look away more often. Syria and what's happened in Aleppo are offered as the biggest examples of that. Are you concerned that moving forward, moving beyond Syria, that there will be more Aleppos that will require more people like you to tell the truth?
I am, and in many ways, it's not so much people like me. The goal for us at the Atlantic Council, and also in the coalition that we are part of, the First Draft News Coalition, is to teach as many digital Sherlocks as possible around the world. We think that we are facing a historic turning point. If you think about it, most everyone that we know today, whether it's you or I or people in our age range, they have been raised in an age that was analog, and now everyone that is born into a digital age. We are the only people of the history of mankind who were born analog and are going to die digital. And that is really changing the way our societies are thinking about conflicts. It is changing the way we're absorbing information, and is putting our democratic institutions and our education systems to a test. People are not trained to understand the digital age well enough just yet, and that's what we want to change. We want to bring these skills, which we think anyone can learn relatively quickly, to as many journalists as possible, and also next generation leaders by training this next group of digital Sherlocks all across the world, so that hopefully it'll be harder for the regimes all across the world to commit such crimes. Otherwise, if we don't do it, we are afraid that there will be a blindness towards the horrors that we are seeing today.
And how can you ensure success? And I'll throw this at you. You're sitting in Washington, and not too far away from you right now in Oxon Hill is the CPAC conference. And today, Steve Bannon was on stage, and again, he lashed out, just like U.S. President Trump, at the media. And he said that people like myself, people in the media, that you can't depend on us to tell the truth anyway. When you have that type of rhetoric coming out of Washington in the house that's behind you there, the White House, how effective can an effort like yours really be?
Look, history is not a straight line. This was a democratic election. A president was elected that some of us might not agree on. I probably am one of them. But what we have to understand is that the American people are not shaped by the White House, but the White House is shaped by the American people. And if we look at the amount of people that were out on the streets the day after the inauguration, we know that there's a lot of opposite positioning to what currently the White House is doing. So my hope is that people who are seeing a wrong course in terms of the way the media is treated, that they will stand up and speak up. It is important that more citizens are recognizing that democracy is not a status, it is a process, and all of them have to take dire part in it. And it also includes media. The media must hold whoever it is, whether it's in the US or abroad, accountable, not just profit of clicks, but actually profit of the fact that they're doing the things they've pledged to do, and that is holding up the highest journalistic ethics.
Well, you're certainly doing fascinating work, Maks, and let's talk again, especially when some of your findings are submitted as evidence in a court of law. Maks Czuperski, Director of the Forensic Research Lab at the Atlantic Council in Washington. Maks, thank you very much for being on the day. We appreciate it.
Brent, happy. Thanks so much.